Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, it's emerged that the Trump administration is blocking the appointment of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as the next Director General of the World Trade Organization, despite the former Finance Minister of Nigeria winning the overwhelming backing of members of the WTO. If her appointment is approved, she'll be the first woman and the first African to hold the post. So why has the US chosen to defy the rest of the WTO membership and reject the appointment of Dr. Okonjo-Iweala? We'll speak to a former Nigerian ambassador who spent many years as a diplomat in America. And later, we're in Nigeria again because the impact those protests against police brutality is having on the country's political and security establishment continues to reverberate, with statements, denials and controversy over the alleged involvement of Nigeria's armed forces in the shootings and reported killings at the Lekki toll gate and elsewhere in Lagos. We'll speak to an international security analyst who's well familiar with the way the Nigerian military operates. Coming up. Now, you might have heard Arise News reporting that the former Nigerian Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala had been cleared to lead the World Trade Organization as its first African and first female Director General. That is, of course, technically true because Dr. Okonjo-Iweala had secured the overwhelming backing of the more than 160 members of the WTO, including countries in Africa, the Caribbean, the European Union, China, Japan, and Australia. However, at the final moment, her candidacy failed to win the support of the United States, which raised last-minute objections. It remains unclear whether Washington's opposition to Dr. Okonjo-Iweala was a deliberate attempt to sabotage an organization much criticized by the American President Donald Trump. Correspondents say it's possible the U.S. position may be affected by the result of next week's presidential election, which the Democratic challenger Joe Biden is currently expected to win if the polls are to be believed. More on the politics and intrigues at the WTO in a moment. But first, here's the spokesperson for the WTO talking about how the Nigerian frontrunner failed to win U.S. support.
The purpose of this meeting was for the three facilitators, led by General Council Chair David Walker of New Zealand, to present to the membership their assessment of the candidate that had the best chance of attaining a consensus of the membership. That candidate, as recommended by Chairman Walker, is Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala of Nigeria. One delegation could not support the candidacy of Dr. Ngozi and said they would continue to support South Korean Minister Yu. That delegation was the United States of America. There will be a General Council meeting held on the 9th of November, at which we hope to take a decision on this very important matter. There was a huge amount of support for the Troika, for the process that they've run. There is a complex way in which you can vote, but the voting, I think that's what John's referring to. I think the overwhelming preference of every one of our members is to decide by consensus, and consultations will be held between now and the 9th of November to try and achieve that consensus. Yes, that's right. They said that she had, by a wide margin, the most preference, that she had wide support across regions and across levels of development, LDCs, developing countries, and developed countries. They said that she had had these since the very beginning of the process.
Well, for more on Washington's rejection of Dr. Okonjo-Iweala as the head of the WTO, I'm joined now in the studio by Ambassador Joe Keshi, who was Permanent Secretary at the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and who, as Nigeria's Consul General in Atlanta, dealt with the Americans diplomatically for many years. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Charles, for having me.
So the overwhelming majority of the WTO member nations support Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's candidacy, but the US defied the lot and rejected her. How has it come to this?
I guess we need to face certain realities, which is that every nation at one time or the other pursues their own designed national interest. I believe for the US, under President Trump, there's been strong criticism of the WTO, not just WTO, but actually almost all international organizations, all the multilateral nations. And so I believe they feel that they needed to put somebody there that comes on the background of what I always talk about in terms of this is our strategic ally. They will listen to us, they will sympathize with us, and they will almost invariably do what we want them to, to do. Because it really does not make sense when you say that almost all nations of the world are backing one candidate and only one guy is standing, on the way saying no, we won't agree.
Unfortunately for her, that one guy is the most powerful guy.
It's very powerful. And everybody respects, Americans' view today, irrespective of whether they dislike Trump or not. Everybody is aware of the immense power of the United States, to do good or to do evil.
But can you see why the US feels that it's not in its interest to have Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala lead the WTO?
I just think that for now, I just think that, oh, by the way, this is the second time I think the US is doing this to Ngozi. Remember when she contested, I think, for the World Bank or something like that? They didn't raise so much objection to her then, but they just wanted an American, real, true blood, American to be in that
She is,
post.
of course, American as well. She's a dual citizen.
Yeah, but Nigerian American. Remember that.
Or she might say American Nigerian.
Yeah, that's probably not what they want. They really want somebody, I believe, that they think that can protect their interests and listen to their objections, or even somebody that will not do much to reform the WHO as it is, WTO as it is, as it is today. Again, I make the point, America is pursuing its strategic interest.
But is it America or is it Donald Trump? Because I've heard people say that, and you're quite right when you talk about the Donald Trump wanting a full, red-blooded American, to head these organizations. Because, he's got a similar problem. He seems to have a problem with a particular set of people. He's got the same problem with the WHO Director General, who happens to be an African. He had the same problem with the person who became the African Development Bank, Akinwumi, who became the African Development Bank head.
Let's not read the meaning the way you are going into it.
Well, I'm trying to interpret it to make it understandable.
In the case of
the WHO,
quite frankly, deep down in his heart, I don't believe Trump has anything against the gentleman. But Trump is someone that looks for an excuse for his own failures.
Right.
So he chose to go after that man, and as well as China, in an attempt to convince Americans that, no, it's not my fault, but it's the fault of this
But do you see the same sort of theme?
No, I don't
because it's got China, also in its sights at the WTO.
Look, I don't see that, but the point I think we need to understand that there's real politics going on here. And what we need to do is what should bother us, not what they've done. What we need to do is what we need to focus on.
Okay, I want to get to that in a minute, because that's where we're going to have you here, for a little while. What you're saying is just very, very interesting. But in your dealings with the Americans, you were the Nigerian consul general in America. You were a permanent secretary at the Foreign Affairs Ministry, which meant you had a broad church of contacts across the diplomatic world, including the United States. Do you find that America is, Nigeria is less able, or countries like Nigeria are less able to do business with America today than they were when you were in office?
No, not really. I've always taken the position, even when I was in the ministry, to say to my colleagues and everybody who care to listen, when they describe our relationship with the United States as strategic, I take the other viewpoint that no, we have a cordial relationship with America. And in answer to your question, yes, as best as we can, we're able to do business with America based on our cordial relationship. But when you begin to talk about strategic relationship, you really cannot compare Nigeria relationship with the United States to America's relationship to Korea, to start with. Nor can you compare Nigeria's United States relationship with Egypt or Israel or with Nigeria.
That's a good point.
We do not belong to that strategic orbit that most Nigerians like to say that we are strategic partners. No, we are not strategic partners, but we maintain cordial relationship, and based on that, we are able to do business as best as we can.
Right.
And we need to understand this, and that's where, again, I go back to say that when you understand that, whether Donald Trump still have the correct mindset based on what he's experiencing in the current election to say, no, I don't want this guy. No, the decision has been made long ago. We are going to support the North Koreans for A, B, C, D, you know. And they just want to see whether they can test the how do you call it now, the
metal, if you like.
Yes, of the rest of the world.
Right.
And the world must just stand firm and resist this, if only for once.
Right. So the question I was going to ask you, and we're going to take a break soon, what impact is this American refusal to back Dr. Okonjo Iweala likely to have? Will it merely delay the process, or could it pose a real threat to her chances of becoming the next WTO Director General?
Look, there's a process. You know, the interesting thing about this conversation with regards to Trump and the number of international organizations is that some of these international organizations, America led leadership for their creation. And Trump has just come to, you know, almost destroy all these institutions and so on. Now, the process has been established, and that's what the rest of the world is saying. We have followed diligently the process to the end point. And one country cannot come on board and say, no, we reject the process. There's no way you can reject that process, except, of course, they decide, they've never voted before, they decide to go,
that's an option.
An option. But again, there was a situation a couple of years ago.
Briefly, because we're taking a break.
Yes, there was a situation a couple of years ago, and the compromise was that, okay, if we can't agree on a particular candidate, let's share the years, one for 3 years and the second one for another 3 years. I sincerely hope that Nigeria and the rest of the world will not succumb to that if that comes on, comes on the table.
Okay, stay with us. We want to talk with you some more. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the U.S. decision to block the appointment of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as the next head of the WTO, despite her winning the overwhelming backing of its members. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, as you may have heard, the U.S. has rejected the candidacy of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala to head the World Trade Organization in defiance of the organization's other member nations and leaving the outcome of the race uncertain. The WTO said Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, who was a former Nigerian finance minister, had attracted more widespread support to become the next Director General than her rival, South Korea's Yoon Myung-hee. But the U.S. has refused to back her, a move which delays the decision until after the American presidential election next week. The process requires all WTO members to reach a consensus, but could end up involving a formal vote if the U.S. continues to hold out. In recent days, 3 leading WTO ambassadors, nicknamed the Troika, have been holding private consultations among the WTO's members to establish which of the 2 remaining candidates attract the widest support, and their conclusion was that Dr. Okonjo-Iweala was the clear winner by an overwhelming majority. and Ambassador Joe Keshi, who was Permanent Secretary at the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and who, as Nigeria's Consul General in Atlanta, dealt with the Americans diplomatically for many years, is still with me in the studio. Thank you for staying with us. In terms of the experience of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, beyond the fact that she's politically acceptable to the majority of the WTO's membership, the US has argued that the South Korean candidate is a more suitable choice because she has 25 years of very specific trade experience and is currently serving as South Korea's trade minister. What makes Okonjo-Iweala the more favored candidate in the face of that kind of hands-on experience, which appears to be directly relevant to the job?
First, Ngozi, it's a global citizen. If she boasts of 25 years of experience as a trade minister, Ngozi could boast of more than 25 years of experience in the World Bank, at the Nigerian state as a foreign minister, as Minister for Finance for 7 years. And then she can look at her track record, all the organizations around the world that Ngozi is a board member. So when you talk of experience, and then she also parades herself, which is true. We are all witnesses of what she did when she was here as a reformer. Let's put it this way.
Yes, very reformist.
Yes, but let me put it this way, that Ngozi is a global citizen and look, think about it. Almost every country on the planet is supporting her, except one. How do you explain that? It's because they know her, they believe in her, they trust in her. They are aware of her track record. And there's certainly no way that they think that just because you're a trade you've been in trade for 25 years. In any case, because you've been in trade for 25 years and you've been involved with WTO, that's precisely why, as many others have observed, that organization is in crisis. And so they need somebody with fresh ideas, fresh mind to take a look at the whole organization and see whatever reform that can be put in place.
And looking at the backstory to all of this, there is a lot of political and trade bickering, isn't there, at the WTO right now between the US and China. And the job of Director General is likely to be undermined by tensions between these two economic superpowers, but also especially by the tendency of the US under President Trump to take unilateral action. So it may not actually be a very pleasant job to go into.
That's why, as she's gone in and praying for everything to be resolved by the 7th, she should also add into
by the 9th.
On the 9th, sorry. She should also add into her prayers, God, please make sure this guy doesn't win.
Yeah, because that was going to be my next point, because all this could, of course, change, couldn't it? I mean, if the US presidential election next week goes against Donald Trump, I mean, do we have some idea of how Joe Biden is likely to approach this issue of American unilateralism? Because the feeling seems to be that he's likely to be more of a team player than Donald Trump.
Not just a team player, but the fact that he's given indication of some aspect of his foreign policy, he's going to return America back to being the leader of the world. He's going to go back to the Paris Club. Yes, he's going to review the Iran deal and the rest. So it shows a clear trajectory of what he wants to do. Look, again, I just think that a couple of things will change. The danger of what's going on now is that if Trump loses, everybody is afraid. What would this guy do? Will it be a wrecking ship before he goes away, completely or not? And will he take it out on a number of institutions that think have defied him and things like that? Look, I'm optimistic that if all the countries supporting Ngozi stands firm, and we reach out to the Americans to have a dialogue with them to find out why and, make a deal and give them the assurance that, no, this lady is not going to stand on your way, but she's going to not just do some reform, but ensure that there's a balance, there's a fair, deal for everybody, not just for the Americans, because this is what Trump wants. As far as he's concerned, look, he complains of America losing at the WTO. But the truth of the matter is that America has won a lot of cases at the WTO. America has lost some, and past presidents have accepted.
But that's not a logic that the Americans are willing under Donald Trump to entertain. So
that's not a logic that Trump wants to entertain.
Well, that's the point. And Trump is the president of the United States, and his administration are the ones who are making these decisions.
Precisely.
So the point really is, under these circumstances, you were at the Nigerian Foreign Ministry for many years, and you were the country's consul general in Atlanta in the U.S. We know, for example, I'm sure you know this from your experience, that the Americans will strong-arm anybody to get their way. I mean, they'll threaten people behind the scenes, they'll threaten to withhold aid and all kinds of things, and you know, and you may find that a few countries will start to capitulate. So my question to you is, what can Nigeria do to try to allay the fears of the U.S. and bring Washington on side? Or is that simply not going to happen with the Trump administration?
I'm not too sure that the rest of the world will listen seriously to the Americans at this point. But that said, here's what I believe we need to do. And I believe that the government and the foreign ministry is already doing that. Number one, we need to reach out to the Americans. Even if somebody disagrees with you, you need to find out why he or she is disagreeing with you and get to understand his own position on the issue. Once you get that position, you begin to negotiate. After all, we have between now and the 7th or the 9th, to sort out this mess that the Americans have created. The second thing we need to do is to reach out to our friends who have remained with us since day one and make sure that they stand firm. If they remain steady fast in the support for Ngozi, I can assure you there's nothing much the Americans will do, even if for the first time they decide to break the rules of the organization and go and vote. I have a strong feeling that Ngozi will still win. But you're right. At this point in time, the only saving grace we have, which we can pray for, is the fact that Trump is involved in a serious election that he might lose. His mindset and the mindset of the people in the administration are committed to seeing what happens after the seeing what happens on the 3rd of November. If it goes their way, we're in trouble. But if it doesn't go their way, there must be some respite for us.
But of course, as we said, and we've got less than a minute, the WTO's constitution does provide for a vote where the majority carries the vote. And so she could still become the WTO Director General. But it is fair to say that life would be extremely difficult for her if her appointment is made against the wishes of the U.S.
That is if Trump still remains the president.
Yes.
If Trump doesn't remain the president, I have a very strong feeling that Ngozi, also being tactful and being a good diplomat, her first, among the first things she will do come October 21st.
Very brief, we're out of time.
Yes, is to run to Washington and begin a dialogue with the new American administration.
Ambassador Keshi, former permanent secretary at the Nigerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and former Nigerian consul in Atlanta, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead, including the impact those protests against police brutality is having on Nigeria's political and security establishment continues to reverberate. Stay with us.